Hey friends, have you ever found yourself wondering about the legality and ethics of hot air balloon companies? No? Me neither. That is until I was at my friend's house and a hot air balloon tried to land in her backyard, to which she said no way, and she continued to tell me about multiple stories in which hot air balloons had landed in her backyard. Thus, I made a TikTok about said situation, asking about the legalities and ethics, which then racked up millions of views and accidentally unearthed some very troubling and quite unethical and possibly illegal practices that many hot air balloon companies have been doing. Now normally this is a part in my video where I say grab a snack, grab a drink, but today I'm asking you to grab a cup because I will be spilling the piping hot air balloon industry tea. Now let me make it clear, I will not be naming the companies that are involved in this drama, but I will be sharing some details that I had not yet shared on TikTok. And if these details were not meant to be shared, then why display them on public Facebook pages as well as in my DMs? So buckle up, friends, because this video is going to be having the same energy as these unethical hot air balloon landings. As in, it's going to be quick, it's going to be messy, and I'm just hoping to get out of it without getting into too much trouble. So just to give you a little background information, I was somewhat aware that hot air balloons were landing in my friend's yard or around my friend's yard before this happened. I remember seeing it on her story and thinking, that's crazy that that happened. That's kind of fun. And it was fun. Once, because apparently hot air balloons had been landing on her property multiple times and around her property as well. And what's interesting about these hot air balloon landings is that once the balloon lands, a huge white van then drives onto the property to pick up the balloon and its occupants. And that, my friends, is the part that we're going to have the most trouble with, right? It's one thing to land a ginormous hot air balloon on somebody's yard, but it's another thing to drive a full-sized van across somebody's property, right? Even the most avid hot air balloon enthusiast, I think, could recognize that that's not cool if they don't have permission. And in my friend's case, I can assure you, they never have. So let's get to the original video. Now, just to set the scene here, I was at my friend's house. We were in her yard with the kids, and suddenly a hot air balloon begins approaching her property. And I'm like, wow, that's really close. And she tells me, yeah, they're probably going to try and land. And I'm thinking, that's crazy. A hot air balloon can't just land in your yard without your permission. Right? Right? Let's watch the video that started it all.
Are they landing? This is crazy. They can't land in your yard. They can't land in your yard.
There's a hot air balloon. There's a hot air balloon. It's gonna be landing soon. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no, 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 no. Wasn't that a gorgeous rendition of that song? So the things that you can hear her saying in that video are basically that, like, oh no, it's gonna try and land. And then she shows me where she thinks it's gonna land. And then she's just like yelling, no, 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 no. And a lot of people were quick to point out, hey, they can't hear you. Like, they're in a hot air balloon. They can't hear what you're saying. The crazy thing is, I had multiple hot air balloonists or hot air balloon pilots get in my DMs and other people who had worked in the companies and said, as long as you're not pulling the fire part, it's actually really quiet. And so as they were coming down, they definitely heard it. I don't know if you could tell in the video, but she's literally screaming, no, 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 because she doesn't want them to land in her yard again and have that van come through. And they're literally waving. She's like, no, no, no. And they're going, like, I don't know if that was like them trying to maybe play off to like the people inside of the balloon that like, no, they love us. And we were like, no, don't land. It was crazy. It was crazy. I couldn't believe it was happening. So that all goes down and we have a really long conversation about it because I just could not believe that hot air balloons, like huge hot air balloons, were landing in her yard against her will and then driving the truck up to retrieve them. I was like, no, they can't just land in your yard. Like, there's no way hot air balloons can just land in your yard. Well, friends, I'm about to educate you in the wild, wild west of hot air ballooning. Now, while I have heard from many in the hot air balloon community that the legalities have gotten better as well as the ethics of most good companies, it's still crazy. So this is what I've learned from my own research, as well as from the many, 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 many hot air balloonists that have DM'd me and commented. Hot air balloons can pretty much land anywhere in case of emergency. And before I share this next part, go ahead and grab that cup if you would, because here's some fresh piping hot tea. Now, despite the fact that this has happened multiple times to my friend, people were still arguing like, this was probably an emergency. How can you not care about the safety of these people in the balloon? Now, I would argue that if a hot air balloon company is landing in somebody's yard as an emergency this many times, they have a safety issue. I would argue that, except I don't have to. You see, I have proof that this type of landing that is happening isn't an emergency or an accident, but damn near a policy for some of these hot air balloon companies, particularly the ones that are landing around my friend. Here's a public Facebook post from one of those companies. Unlike other aircrafts, we often intentionally land in subdivisions, parking lots, parks, and almost any place we can fit. Since we have no ability to steer the balloon, we are reliant on wind currents to take us to our final destination. And while these companies are saying they absolutely get permission before landing in these locations, they are intentionally landing in backyards and in neighborhoods. And if that's not enough for you, listen to this. I shit you not, while bragging about how great the landing crew is, so that's the crew that is in the van that helps the balloon land and then packs the balloon up. This is what it says. This team knows how to deal with landowners or kids or a cul-de-sac for spectators. They know how to explain to people who might think it was an emergency landing, even though it was a planned landing in the backyard. So we can go ahead, I think, and rule out that these are emergency landings. Now, again, the company I'm mentioning here says that they get consent for every one of their landings. But my point in bringing these posts up is that companies do intentionally land on private property. Let's keep going, because the argument now moves on to, do they have consent to land or not? I am literally turning red due to the piping hot nature of this tea, okay? Hot air balloon companies say they get permission before they land. And I believe that statement's a little bit inaccurate. Now, let me be clear, there are absolutely hot air balloon companies that are wholly ethical in the way that they do their business. As in, they have permission every time they land, and some of them even have really good relationships with people who have a ton of land, so that they know they can land on their properties at any point. However, there are companies who claim they get permission when actually what they do is they land and then they go up to the homeowner and ask if it's okay. I feel like that is less of asking permission and more of asking forgiveness. Now, again, most companies, if the person says, no, I don't want you on my land, will then lift up again and go somewhere else if possible. In fact, I had a guy in my comment section who had paid to go on a hot air balloon ride who had that happen. Like, they landed in somebody's yard and the person was like, no, get out. And they had to lift up and then go like a little bit down the ways. But again, is it permission if you've already done it? But let's go over some of the things that have been said to me about these landings, okay? One of the things that hot air balloon pilots, crews, enthusiasts have said is that a hot air balloon landing on your yard has absolutely no effect, like does no damage. I find it very hard to believe, personally, that a big old hot air balloon landing in your yard would not have any impact whatsoever. Like, the argument is like, well, it doesn't even do any damage when it lands. Okay, but I think you have the right to not want a big old hot air balloon to land in your yard, regardless of how the basket impacts the grass, okay? But let's say it does no damage. I hope these people don't claim the same argument for the huge white van that they drive through people's yards. Now, I've also found out that sometimes they land in someone's yard, again, prior to getting any consent, and they go up and it ends up nobody's home or they can't reach the landowner for some reason. In that case of landing on a property without prior permission and not being able to get permission after you've landed, the ethical thing to do is to carry the basket out. I had a pilot say that is what they do. Okay, but unethical hot air balloon people? You know those unethical hot air balloon people? They are known to drive vans and try and get in and out before the police are called or before anyone comes home. So there are absolutely hot air balloon companies that drive vans on people's private property without consent. And I know that absolutely for a fact, not just from people telling me their stories, but from my friends' personal experience. Let's get back to that. And I'm going to ask you to grab your cups again, friends, because this tea is absolutely piping hot and has not been spilt in any other location. Pay attention to the details here because they will matter when I bring up the response from the company. So my friend's at her house and she sees another balloon coming. And of course, it's not the balloon she has as much an issue with as the van that follows said balloon. So she looks out her window and sure enough, the van comes down the street. Now, initially, it is parked in front of her house. Over 5 minutes, allegedly, maybe more. Now, let me be crystal clear. In the time that the van was outside of her house, nobody came to her door and asked her permission to either get on her land to get said balloon or to use her driveway. And there was ample time to do so. Keep that in mind. Now, eventually the balloon gets to a point that the van decides it's time to go. And by time to go, I mean time to drive very quickly down her driveway. Now, luckily, her sister happened to be over at the time. She sent her sister out because she believed that that van that was now flying down her driveway was going to go in her yard. And to me, that's a logical thing to think, considering that they had ample time to ask for permission and hadn't. So it goes down her driveway and her sister's like, stop, back it up. And then they backed up and they ended up going through the neighbor's yard. Now, before we go any further, I want to say this company has said they had explicit consent to go through the neighbor's yard from said neighbor. Let me get that right out of the way. However, I know certainly they did not have consent to drive up my friend's driveway, especially at the speeds that they were going. Now, at this point, I decided to do some research and figure out what companies could be doing this. And in my research, there's only a few that it could have been, so I decided to message them. And let me say, I really hope you have enough room in your cup, friends, because this is the hottest, spiciest tea of them all. So I reach out to multiple companies and I get one that answers pretty quickly. What I thought was really interesting is one of the things that they said to me was that they thought 99% of people love seeing the balloons and love when they land, basically. It's just the one guy who's having a bad day and complains. While I could argue that I don't think 99% of people are excited about balloons landing in their yard, I think the interesting thing here is saying that anybody who complains is just a guy having a bad day. Because to me, that's a very dismissive way of looking at complaints against your company, especially when you are talking to a person who is complaining about unethical practices that are currently happening, particularly if you're not the company that did it. And while we're on that topic, I did end up sending them a picture, the one that I had of the crew and the van. And the company looked at it and eventually said, that's not us, and we don't use that vehicle. And in my head, I'm like, okay, great. I can go ahead and cross that off my list and try and find who it is. But then they said something that was strange to me. So I had sent them a screenshot of those photos because I was having issues with my phone. And they then said back, after they said it wasn't them, they said that didn't even happen within the past 6 months. To which I said, I know, this is just the picture I have of the crew. This was last summer. But how did they know? If they weren't present and weren't a part of it, when this happened. Now, some people said it was metadata, but it was a screenshot. So there was no metadata on it, to the best of my knowledge. Interesting. But again, I took them at their word. It wasn't them. Now, they told me how to get her on a specific list so that balloons wouldn't land there. And I was thrilled with this. I was really happy that they'd given me so much information and glad to know it wasn't them. So that whole conversation happened late at night, which is bizarre anyways, but went to bed, woke up, and I swear to God, I was literally filming my next video, which was basically going to say, reached out to a company, it wasn't the people that did it, but they did give me some good information. I can get her on a list so nobody lands there anymore. We're done here, great, awesome. Except as I'm filming this video, my phone dings and I have received another message from said company, changing the entire energy of my next video. What? In what world is that an appropriate way to talk to someone? Specifically when this is a person who is simply trying to get people to stop landing and driving in their friend's yard in an unethical manner. Where is that TikTok HR lady when you need her? Because goddamn, is that a horrible line to say. I don't know as a company that I would ever speak to someone that way, but definitely probably not to someone who is actively viral about your company. Once the initial shock of the unprofessionalism wore off, I started to wonder, why would a company who said they were not involved care so much about my TikTok video? So I asked, I thought you said this was not you. Why are you concerned? And what facts do I have wrong? Hold them cups steady, folks, because this is what this person says to me. I was on the ground crew that night. We had prior permission to drive onto the landowner's yard. They were very happy. We even did champagne with him and a neighbor. Hold up. Hold up. Wait a second. You saw a photo of the crew and of the balloon, and you told me that was not your company. Now you've seen that I have a viral TikTok going, and suddenly, not only was it your crew, but you were there? Can someone explain to me how you would not recognize the crew you were with? And I've even had like hot air balloon crew people point out the fact that like, even if he didn't see the crew, he would recognize the balloon. Like, there are people who say, I know like other cruise balloons from a mile away. And a girl even messaged me about how they like name the balloons. Each balloon has its own name. So in my mind, there is no chance in hell that both the crew and the balloon were not immediately recognizable from the photo. Now, again, I'm not arguing whether or not the neighbor said yes or no. They're saying he said yes. I'll say that's true. But what still stands is they drove up my friend's driveway. And at the time that I had this conversation, I did not know about the van being parked for some time before. So at this point, I only knew they had driven up the driveway and had to be stopped. So I end up saying, so when you saw the picture, you lied about it being you? The van absolutely drove up my friend's driveway without permission. Her sister told them to back up. They then moved to the neighbor's yard. The car was on her property without permission. She stopped them from going onto her yard. Okay, so the company then tells me they had to research the photo. So the person who was there had to research the photo of the balloon landing that they were on. Drop your thoughts in the comments about whether or not this explanation makes sense to you, because to me, that makes no sense at all. I cannot understand that. But we move, right? But we move. Now, he does reiterate he will put my friend on the no land list, and he also gives a number if I want to reach out, which at this point I did not, due to said attitude with me. And I just kept reiterating that regardless of the other circumstances, the van going down my friend's property without her consent is unacceptable. Now, in my video, I did not say that van drove on my friend's yard. I said that van went down my friend's driveway towards the yard, was stopped, and then went in her neighbor's yard, okay? There are other times that other vans have been in her yard and other balloons, but that time they went in the neighbor's. This is what was said back to me. Driving on somebody's driveway to ask for permission and driving on somebody's grass are two different things. So if you're saying a van drove up your neighbor's driveway, which they may have done to ask permission, is completely different than the van just drove through her yard without permission. Two completely different things. Now you've heard this person's perspective, and you've also heard that the van sat outside her house for some time before it then went fuming down her driveway and had to be stopped. Again, feel free to comment, but do you think that a van that was waiting outside of her property for some time, like over 5 minutes, and then hit the driveway going fast enough that my friend's sister ran out and said, "Stop, stop"? Do you feel like that was to ask permission? I feel like if a van was outside and waiting for the balloon to come down to the level that they needed it to proceed, that would be the perfect time to ask my friend for permission. But they did not. And my friend's sister's takeaway was that that van was headed for the yard. That was how she perceived that interaction. It did not feel like the van was slowly driving up to let someone out to ask permission. And just for some extra flavor and sass, he made sure to say, also, learn about how balloons fly. We can't steer, we just go with the wind. And let me just say, in the past few days, I have learned more than I ever hoped to about hot air balloons, their abilities, and the legalities of what it is that they do. So I did know enough to know that balloons don't have complete control over the way that they're moving. But I also know that if balloons are landing in that area repeatedly, then they are somewhat aiming for that area. Also, permission is needed to land, and my friend has never given permission for balloons to land in her yard or vans to be on her property. And thirdly, the way that this company responded, as well as others, is kind of alarming because on the one hand, they're basically saying like, we can't steer, like we don't really control where we're landing, yet you're being paid to do so. Yet you're landing in the relatively same spot more than once. And in their own promotions, companies like this are saying we intentionally land in backyards and in cul-de-sacs. So it can't be both. Either you're telling the people who have criticisms that you can't steer, or you're reassuring your passengers that you do have control and these aren't accidental landings. These are intentional and purposeful. You can't just pick depending on which suits your business. And the craziest part of all of this is my friend and I literally just wanted balloons to stop landing in her yard. We just wanted vans to stop crossing her property without permission. That's all. In my messages, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm asking for. It could have been so simple. Literally all that had to happen was this company say, hey, I'm sorry if there was any miscommunication as to consent, but we will put you on a list so there will not be any further landings or vans going onto your property. That's it. That's all we wanted. But instead I got this response, which I think was incredibly unprofessional, had an undue attitude, especially since I never named any businesses. I still have not named any businesses. And that's how I was spoken to. There was an entitled attitude that was very off-putting and honestly somewhat alarming, especially when this all comes down to my friend not wanting someone to illegally be on her property. It's really giving Chad energy to me. This idea of like, yeah, we land in your yard. We're going to land in your yard if we need to. But everybody loves us. Like everybody loves hot air balloons. If you don't like them, you're weird. You're the one who's having a bad day, I guess, because you could only have a bad day to ever complain about hot air balloons. And like, I get permission. Okay, I get permission. Maybe I land first and then get permission. Or maybe like I land and nobody's there to tell me no. So, that's the same thing as permission, basically. Is it, Chad? Is it? My friend has had balloons land in her yard without her consent. My friend has had vans on her property without her consent. And despite all that, she simply didn't want any more balloons or vans on her yard. That's all she was asking for. It's a very reasonable request, in my opinion. But instead of addressing the issue, instead of apologizing, instead of saying, hey, sorry if there was miscommunication, it won't happen in the future, they did the old Chad double down. And just between us, friends, if my business was involved in a TikTok viral story, I certainly wouldn't be pulling attitude with the people that were affected by said story. In closing, today I had someone say a very poignant statement that these hot air balloon companies are the Tiger Kings of the sky. And I could not agree more. I hope you have enjoyed this tea. As I said, it is piping hot and only served on this channel. So thank you for being here. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. And if you like this video, go ahead and give it a like. And truly, I hope this is your last drop of hot air balloon tea. Thank you for being here, and I will see you next time. Bye.